Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are. My name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar, where today I'm in a very special place. Today I'm at the University of Calgary, and I'm here in a classroom with amazing students that are studying about the future cities, how to make cities that are equitable, sustainable, and playful. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, but for the last 25 years, I've been living in Toronto, Canada, and I've been very lucky to have worked in over 350 cities around the world. And in this webinar, it's one of the ways to give back. It's always free and hopefully always interesting. But today, all of us are here because we want to hear about the power of placemaking, creating happier cities from the ground up. And we have two amazing guests. Emma, Avery, and Leah Karlberg. Hello, Emma. Leah, how are you?
We're doing well, thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Gil. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. So everyone is here. We got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people from all over the world. We are eager. We want to learn what is this about, what is the power of placemaking and what is happy cities. Obviously, Emma and Leah work with my good friend Charles Montgomery, who's the author of The Happy City. And now he's walking the mountains of Ecuador. This is January. But Emma and Leah have so much knowledge and experience. And thank you very much. I'm grateful. So now tell us about yourself. Tell us about placemaking and creating happier cities. Well, today, I'm in a very, very special place. All of these are the students of an amazing class, Leah and Emma. So some of them are going to come up here and have questions direct on the microphone. They are learning on how to create the future of cities. So Emma and Leah, go ahead.
Thanks, Gil.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here today. My name is Emma. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit more shortly, but we wanted to start with a short story. So this is the story about a seventh grader named Chloe. Chloe went to Glenbrook Middle School in New Westminster, which is a municipality just outside of Vancouver in Canada. And one day she noticed a problem. She noticed that the street wasn't safe for kids walking and biking to her school, even though the school was located along a greenway, which is a slow route that's supposed to prioritize biking and walking and rolling. So she decided to write a letter to the city with the help of her dad. In her letter, she wrote, "Cars don't yield to us while we're riding our bikes. We end up having to pull over because we feel unsafe." And as many of you probably know, this experience isn't unusual in North America and in many other places where our neighborhoods prioritize space and safety for cars rather than for people. But Chloe's story is unique because of what happened next. Instead of ignoring her letter, the city decided to take action. Immediately, they switched the stop sign orientation at a few streets, but they wanted to do more, and they really wanted the solution to be shaped by the community. For one, because they wanted to make sure that residents would support any changes to traffic patterns on the street, but two, because they recognized an opportunity to engage the students in urban planning. So they brought us on board to help co-create a solution that would work for everyone. Working with the school's amazing teachers, we taught the students the basics of street design, like how curb bump outs or extensions of the sidewalk could reduce the speed of cars turning at the intersection. And then we challenged these middle school students to design the bump outs with their own ideas and artwork. In the end, over 60 students submitted designs, and then they voted on their favorite ones. And then they actually painted the winning designs on the street. So, beyond having their say, these youth improved safety and active transportation, and they created a new space that reflected their community. They did it together with their classmates, building this sense of ownership over the street right outside their school. And all of this started because of one small letter from a seventh grade student. And it sparked this amazing, colorful, joyful transformation of the intersection that was shaped directly by the students, their parents, teachers, neighbors, and of course, the support of the city. And this story, we tell it because it really reinforced our belief that local and community-led solutions are some of the most powerful tools that we have to build stronger, happier, more socially connected communities. And it's what we're calling in this lecture, as well as in other work we do, the power of placemaking. So before we jump a little bit more into placemaking and what it means, we'll just introduce ourselves quickly. So my name's Emma Avery. As Gil mentioned, I'm an urban planner and a communication specialist at Happy Cities, and I'll hand it over to Leah.
Thanks so much, Emma, and thanks, Gil, for having us today and for everyone who's joined. My name is Leah Karlberg, and I work as an urban planner and designer with Happy Cities. And we'd like to acknowledge that while this session is happening online, that Emma and I both live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, also known where we're calling in from as Vancouver, Canada. And we do recognize the land as the setting for all our work in placemaking, in community building, and the ongoing learning that takes place at Happy Cities. The focus of our session today is, of course, on placemaking, but really, what do we mean by placemaking? When we use the term at Happy Cities, we're referring to community-led or supported initiatives that aim to improve a place. But just as important as improving a place, we find that placemaking also strengthens the connections between people who are involved in that placemaking project, or people who just generally live and benefit or use those spaces. And it's this intangible part of placemaking that really amplifies the outcomes. In our research on the power of placemaking, we found that community-led initiatives often have more than one positive outcome. So in addition to improving a place and perhaps creating new social connections, there's evidence that placemaking can also enhance a sense of safety and comfort for the people who are there. It can help support a vibrant local economy, can strengthen a sense of belonging and inclusion for people, and can encourage physical and mental health, as well as support the climate and local resilience. When done well, each of these outcomes also has ties to the equity that we create, or equitable opportunities that are created in local settings. And really, anyone can be a placemaker. Placemakers are municipalities, for example, city staff, local businesses, community groups and organizations, people like you and I and our neighbors, or people like Chloe in middle school in New Westminster who just want to bike to school safely. And as an important note, placemaking projects really are local. They're created by and for the communities they serve, considering available resources, and also often building capacity in those community members who are learning to understand and respond to their local needs and their shared needs.
So as Gil mentioned earlier, of course, we work for Happy Cities. We're an urban planning firm and design firm that grew out of our founder's book, Happy City by Charles Montgomery. And today we work with cities, developers, researchers, nonprofits around the world to design public spaces, streets, and housing. And the book Happy City resonated with a lot of people because it uncovered how the design decisions that we make every day influence our well-being. And building on this research, our firm's mission is to create happier, healthier, more inclusive communities, both through our consulting practice and through ongoing research and education. Next slide. For several years, we've been conducting research on the power of placemaking to transform shared spaces in communities across Canada and beyond. Because in truth, the way that we've designed our communities across much of North America has actively hurt our sense of community and our ability to connect with neighbors. There are many reasons for this. One of the big ones is that a lot of our communities lack places to gather, and residents often have few tools to shape the design of their community. In Metro Vancouver, our research finds that 1 in 5 feel their neighborhood is lacking a sense of community, and nearly half of the people we surveyed feel lonely at least sometimes, if not more. And this loneliness is not unique to Vancouver. We see this trend nationally and internationally, with the US Surgeon General recently declaring loneliness a national health epidemic in 2023. And the common stat going around that you might have heard is that when we're chronically lonely or socially isolated, it's as bad for our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It can even increase our risk of premature death by as much as 50%.
Similarly, research has found that social connection between neighbors, again, thinking at a really local level, has a number of benefits. So for instance, For youth, living in a community where neighbors know one another is associated with positive outcomes, including a sense of safety and higher feelings of self-esteem. People are also more likely to give and accept help in the case of emergency in a neighborhood like this. People are more likely to volunteer, vote, and otherwise be civically involved in their communities. And for older adults, these neighborhood ties are linked with emotional well-being and also their own self-rated health, as well as a lower risk of mortality. There's even research that suggests that for older adults, social support from neighbors benefits their mental health even more or as much as support from family or friends, again, because of that proximity.
So we realized that there are all these positive well-being outcomes and benefits associated with social connection and knowing your neighbors. But in order to really realize these benefits, it's important that placemaking is shaped and led by community members themselves. So one example is the story of New Beginnings, which is a temporary modular housing building managed by Luma Native Housing Society. This building houses about 50 residents on a site that's awaiting large-scale redevelopment by the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the goal of this building on this temporary site is to provide rapid housing and help Indigenous people transition out of homelessness. So at New Beginnings, Luma aims to provide a safe space where residents can build trust and connections with staff and the wider community. So one way they do this is by organizing social activities and cultural programming for residents, often using the space just outside their building for events like this community barbecue. A few years ago, we received funding from CMHC, that's the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, for Luma staff to test and implement more cultural programming activities at the site. In particular, we wanted to better understand how community building activities could support well-being for people who are transitioning out of homelessness and provide a roadmap for more of these supportive housing buildings to implement similar activities. Of course, at Happy Cities, we usually begin our work with a well-being framework or a set of core principles to guide the project. But we know that well-being looks different to different people. It needs to be grounded in both research and lived experience. So we worked with the staff at Luma and other housing providers to establish these core principles based on the needs of their residents. For Luma, simply providing a roof overhead wasn't enough. They needed to establish a sense of trust with and among residents as a starting point for building community. And so with the funding, Luma staff organized all kinds of social activities like the barbecues, as well as drum making and drum circles. They organized workshops to sew ribbon skirts, as well as to make smudge kits and photo collage boards. And through each of these activities, the residents gradually opened up to share more stories about themselves with staff and with their neighbors. In particular, the garden became a spot for informal conversations between neighbors, taking the pressure off of social interaction by building it around this shared activity and space. And the building manager told us that the community garden became a big source of pride for residents, and that when guests come over, they always want to show off the garden to them. But to further cement this sense of place and belonging in the courtyard outside the building, Luma wanted to do more. So they got funding from BC Housing to build a 19-foot teepee and cultural space right next to the community garden. And they hired a local teepee builder to create all the materials and to guide participants and help them build the teepee together. So this process of working together to build the teepee didn't just transform the space. It built a sense of ownership and excitement and pride among participants. And because people had a hand in shaping it, they wanted to watch out for the space and take care of it, and they were excited to take part in activities there. Luma has since used this teepee as a cultural space, holding talking circles, events, and ceremonies, including for people who have passed away. The teepee also opens the door to greater connections with the surrounding neighborhood. So, for example, on National Indigenous Peoples Day, Luma invited the wider community into the space for a celebration, and the building staff told us that residents in the surrounding neighborhood have been interested in learning more about the teepee, which is quite prominent and visible on the site. And the impact of this work is really highlighted in this quote from Shauna, who's the program manager at New Beginnings. Shauna said, once we painted the shelter with the medicine wheel colors and put up the teepee, the outdoor garden really transformed into a community space. And so, even though New Beginnings is a temporary home, these actions go a long way in creating a sense of place, belonging, and connection, both among residents and with the wider neighborhood. And through our research, many residents expressed that these activities boosted their mood while offering safe spaces to reflect and heal and learn.
And at Hippie Cities, we've also worked on a number of projects to support placemaking at different levels, so including at the policy or planning level. And I'll share another example of the power of placemaking to add on to Emma's story. But this time it's an initiative that's spearheaded by the city, in particular by the city of Surrey. And for context, the city of Surrey is one of the largest in terms of population, fastest growing and most culturally diverse cities in British Columbia here. And neighborhoods in Surrey are experiencing really rapid growth. There's a lot of new development, major planning, and large infrastructure investments, including around rapid transit. But not for the Newton neighborhood. And this was the neighborhood we focused on. It's a huge neighborhood of some 200,000 people, but residents had pretty significant concerns and growing concerns about their experiences in Newton, including just their experiences walking on local streets and visiting their parks. Their concerns ranged from safety and cleanliness to a lack of amenities, and just simply that there weren't a lot of outdoor spaces to gather. Showing their dedication, the city wanted short-term and really immediate solutions to improve Newton. So they didn't want to wait for 5, 10, 20 years or for new development to change the landscape. Instead, they looked to placemaking as a solution, and they hired our team at Happy Cities to develop a placemaking action plan that is really tailored to this neighborhood. The goal of the action plan is to enhance and beautify the neighborhood, but also to engage with residents, and all through fairly low-cost solutions, or low cost when you're comparing them in a city budget to major infrastructure. The action plan provides the resources and opportunities for community members to really feel like they can take ownership over the neighborhood and over these shared spaces, much like the teepee that Emma shared about. So we developed this action plan based on the priorities we heard from over 2,000 residents and local businesses who live or work in Newton. And we used the principles of placemaking to hear from the community. So we met people where they were. For example, we attended a community picnic that was hosted by Neighborhood Association. We were at the neighborhood park. Over 300 people attended, and we offered activities like a Polaroid photo booth. And through that activity, we were able to invite families to share about their priorities on improving the park. What would they like to see there? And this approach to engagement really helped easily demonstrate how placemaking projects can bring energy to public spaces and can really encourage social connections and fun. Maybe as a side note, we ran out of food at the community picnic, and one person went and bought like 20 pizzas just on their own. Another person picked up baskets full of samosas and brought them to the park, and it was really a fantastic time. So this has all taken place within a really short time frame. The Focus Newton Action Plan was adopted earlier last year, along with a budget to go with it, which was so important. And since earlier last year, the city has already implemented over 50 of these recommended actions. So some of those actions are shown here. They range from trail upgrades to supporting artists who are able to create temporary public art and showcase that. The city installed new pedestrian scale lights to make spaces safer, more accessible. The city collaborated to host a language-based storytime program. There was also outdoor movies over the summertime. And the city installed amenities like shelters and drinking fountains just to make sure that park spaces can be usable for community-led events and gatherings. And we wanted to share this example because it's a way that planners and cities can show a commitment to placemaking. By creating policies like this that directly uplift and support community members and their shared spaces, it really is a win-win for both the city and the residents. And that's what we've seen with this project. As the mayor of Surrey said, this comprehensive plan is more than a set of initiatives. It's a commitment to enhancing livability in the Newton community. And really, the learnings from a project like this shouldn't be confined to one city, but rather shared broadly, which is why we wanted to highlight it today. In line with this, with sharing these learnings, we've realized more and more over the last few years that there really is a need for more data and more resources on public life and public places. So we've developed a number of free resources to try to fill this gap. And we're hoping to share just 2 of those resources with you today. Our goal with these resources is to help motivate the case for more placemaking projects, whether that's funding like neighborhood small grants, or for cities to think about the policies they have in place and how those are either allowing for placemaking to happen or potentially restricting them, and potentially that could be unintentionally. So for example, closing park spaces to groups, not letting people do organized activities might just unintentionally limit the placemaking opportunities. So highlighting two of those resources today, one is a series of snapshots called The Power of Placemaking. And these snapshots share data and they highlight placemaking stories from across Canada. And the second resource that we're sharing today is the Public Life Study, and that is an assessment tool. And I'll share a bit more about both of those. And I believe if you keep an eye on the chat, we'll try to link both of those tools as well if you want to check them out. So the Public Life Study tool was just released for free last year. It's a tool that at Happy Cities we've been using for 5-10 years. We've developed it, and it also won the Canadian Institute of Planning Award for its methodology and impact. And the purpose of this assessment tool is to measure how people feel and act in shared spaces. It's most commonly used as a comparative tool. So for example, you might wish to take, if you have funding, let's say a city planner has funding to improve a plaza space with some new design, you might wish to compare that site before and after those design changes have been made. So you could assess that 1 year, make those changes, come back the next year, and collect more data to see actually how has the use changed, how have those users changed, what types of activities are taking place in the space, and so on. So the tool has two parts, and I would say it's fairly easy to implement, for example, with a coworker or a couple volunteers. And we wrote it with step-by-step instructions that are also available online. So the tool has sheets to conduct both a short intercept survey, which you'll see on the left here, and then also to collect data through behavioral observation. And you'll see those data collection sheets on the right. So the behavioral observation sheets will allow us to count who's moving through a space. And then there's another sheet that allows you to count who's lingering in a space and what kinds of activities are taking place there. So for example, through observation, we might be looking for behaviors that suggest a space is doing well. Those are pro-social behaviors. So for example, people are laughing together, they might be eating, they might be meeting another friend. Those are the types of activities that would indicate the space is doing well. Another finding that suggests space is doing well is if there's an equal number of female presenting people as male, since women are just typically underrepresented in public spaces and more likely to feel unsafe, especially if you're comparing data at different times of day, night, weekend, evening, for example. Then the intercept survey asks just a few short and very subjective questions. Overall, the intercept survey takes no more than 2 minutes. And the goal with it is to really capture how people feel right then and there. So as I mentioned, it's very subjective about their experience, their personal experience in that space. So for example, if we're interested in learning about how trusting people feel of others in a public space, we might ask questions like, on a scale of 1 to 5, if you lost your bag here, would you expect it to be returned to you? Or another question could be, how comfortable would you feel with your children playing here, not directly supervised? And then through this data, we can sort of tell a narrative of who's using the space, who isn't. We could also compare the data we collect with local census data about who's represented in the space. Do we see youth? Do we see seniors? Do we see people of different ages, backgrounds, and abilities? And then we can try to start to understand how the design of that space is working or isn't working, and to make recommendations to improve that space. As I mentioned, this tool is available for free now, and we hope that you might have a range of uses for it. We think some of those uses might include evaluating new spaces or identifying improvements that are needed in existing spaces. If you think about spaces that maybe you use regularly or that you're thinking about in your work. We also think the tool might be able to motivate planning and policy changes in your city, in our cities, and just generally help to share more evidence, more data to further investment into the public realm across all of our cities. Then I'll pivot to the second resource. This one is called The Power of Placemaking, and it's based on research and stories that we collected over the last couple of years. We connected with over 100 placemakers across Canada as part of collecting those stories and that data. And many of those projects were funded by the Healthy Communities Initiative, who was our partner in this project. So the Power of Placemaking is a visual set of graphic sort of cards, infographic style. They showcase evidence on how on the benefits of community-led placemaking. And they also link placemaking to a number of different themes that came up. So one of those themes we've already talked so much about is social connection, of course. So there's a section on the power of placemaking, snapshots just on social connection. But the other themes include local economy, health, resilience, and so on. So we invite you to read the snapshots or to use them however you see fit, whether that's in a presentation, on social media, or just to learn a little bit more about some of the opportunities that might be available. And as with all of the work we do at Happy Cities, we hope that these resources can help contribute to a more evidence-based approach to urban planning, with the idea being to strengthen human-centered design and design that really works for everyone, including Chloe and her friends in middle school.
And just before we wrap up, building on what Leah was saying, there are two pieces that are so important to building momentum for placemaking. One is gathering this evidence through tools like a public life study, and one is capturing the stories of these community members and groups that are leading the changes and initiating change themselves, because we know that a lot of community groups don't always have data, but they do have these wonderful stories about street transformations or public space transformations. And that's part of what we tried to capture in the Power of Placemaking snapshots, and also with Chloe's story back at the beginning of this presentation, where it took just one seventh grader to spark a change on a local street. And of course, it took a few more people to help bring the idea to life. Chloe had help from students, parents, teachers, and all of this really was possible in the end because the city listened and supported these students to make a change instead of ignoring feedback from a young community member. So after the day of painting, where all the kids came out to paint the street together, we overheard one of the middle school kids say, "I'm going to bring my kids back here in 20 years and show them how we made the street safer." And this really stood out to us, and we saw firsthand how these kids built a sense of ownership and pride while improving safety on the street outside their school. And this project also had the added benefit of building trust between the students and the city and showing that their voices would be heard and listened to. And ultimately, Chloe's story really shows that places work better for everyone when community members have the tools and resources to shape their neighborhoods themselves. It's what we call the power of placemaking. So that's all for our presentation today. Thank you again so much, Gil, for having us and for everyone being here today. The QR code link goes to our website. You're also welcome. We invite you to get in touch with us.
Okay, we always end with a question, but before we end, I want to remind everybody that in 2 weeks, we have the topic is the best climate activist is a good urban planner. And Hélène Jacquier, who was one of the right-hand people with Anne Hidalgo in Paris and now is leading the director of cities at C40, will be our guest. I want to thank both of you for having been our guest and teaching us about placemaking and happy cities. And we end with a call to action. You have people here from all over the world, and this is not an academic exercise. People are here because they want to learn on how to be better, passionate advocates on whatever people are interested, whether it's planting trees or doing or organizing parks or arts or whatever. So what is your call to action to the full house that we have today? How can they move forward with placemaking and creating happy cities?
Do you want to go, Leah, or do you want me to go? That's such a good question. I think there's so many depending on who you are. But I think it really is what you were saying, Gil, is trust and support community members to do this work and give them the resources, whether it's financial support or otherwise, to make this happen. That's one of the key ones. I think one other thing I'd say just on a personal note is, start a connection with your neighbor. Think about how you might change a space in your neighborhood and what would it look like if you worked with other people to do that.
Thank you. And one of the things that I love about placemaking is always start with a blank page. The most important thing I think is to go to the citizens, to the people and say, okay, what would you like to do here? Because often placemaking fails when the cities bring a fully designed plan and then people get the feeling that there is tokenism and that they're not really considered. I think we learned a lot today about placemaking, about happy cities, and how placemaking can help create happy cities. I want to thank you very, very much. I want to thank everyone, all the participants from all over. Have a wonderful day, night, wherever in the world you are. Thank you. And thank you very much for the University of Calgary for hosting me today. And tomorrow evening, I'm doing a keynote. And also, I love to go to the universities and try to learn and share with the students. Now I'm going to have a 2-hour session with these magnificent students. So please invite me anywhere. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.